Welcome. Today we are going to be constructing a timeline, really a cultural history, of one of the most volatile periods in modern British history. We're looking back to the mid-1970s.
It's important to set the scene.
Absolutely. I want you, our listener, to try and visualize the social climate of the United Kingdom at that time. It's a stark contrast to the sort of colorful imagery we associate with the 1960s.
Very much so. The economy was in a deep depression.
Right. And unemployment rates were climbing rapidly. You had widespread strikes, and this led to refuse, actual trash, physically piling up on the streets.
It was a period defined by stagnation, by a sense of decay. The post-war optimism had completely evaporated.
And for a young person then, say a working-class teenager in London, what was the outlook?
Bleak. The traditional routes to employment, to stability, they were disappearing. This concept of no future, which would later become, of course, a famous lyric, it wasn't just a slogan. It was a genuine sociological sentiment among the youth.
And it's from this exact environment that the Sex Pistols emerge. Now, when we discuss musical acts, we are typically analyzing, decades of output, multiple albums. This subject it's distinct.
Utterly distinct.
Their initial defining lifespan was approximately 2.5 years. That's it. They formed in 1975, and they'd completely dissolved by early 1978.
It's a remarkably brief window, but within that time frame, they effectively initiated the entire punk movement in the United Kingdom. They didn't just influence music, they fundamentally altered the trajectory of popular music, of fashion, of graphic design.
So our objective today is to trace their biography. We want to go from that initial formation in 1975 through their chaotic peak, their dissolution, and very significantly, we want to bring it right up to their surprising activities in 2024 and even looking ahead to 2025.
And in doing so, we have to separate the factual events from the mythology.
A mythology that was often cultivated by their own management.
Correct. It's essential to distinguish the actual lives of the band members. We're talking about Steve Jones, Paul Cook, Glenn Matlock, John Lydon, and later Sid Vicious from the marketing narrative of pure chaos.
Okay, so let's begin. We have to go back even further than 1975. We start in 1972. Before the name Sex Pistols even existed, the core of this group was already forming in London.
That's right. This involved a few teenagers, primarily Steve Jones, who was actually on vocals at this point, Paul Cook on the drums, and another boy named Wally Nightingale on guitar.
And they went by a few different names.
They did. The Strand, the Swankers, nothing that stuck. It was very embryonic.
Now, there's a very important detail regarding their formation, specifically concerning their equipment. It speaks volumes about their origins.
It does. They didn't go out and purchase their instruments. Steve Jones has been very transparent over the years about the fact that he and Cook, they utilized stolen equipment.
So they were thieves.
Jones had a troubled background. It involved petty crime. And this detail is significant because it highlights the complete lack of resources available to them. This wasn't a band manufactured by a record label. These were individuals from the street using whatever means were necessary to just make a sound.
And these individuals, they started to congregate around a specific area, King's Road in Chelsea.
Yes, and two establishments in particular served as focal points. One was a place called Acme Attractions, but the primary hub, the real center of gravity, was a shop operated by Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood.
And that shop is a story in itself. It wasn't always the same thing.
No, it underwent several evolutions that really mirrored the changing subcultures of the time. It first opened as Let It Rock, and it sold clothing for the Teddy Boy revival scene.
Okay.
Then it became Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die, which catered more to a rocker leather jacket aesthetic.
And finally,
eventually it was renamed Sex.
And it's in that final iteration of the shop as Sex that the visual identity of this whole movement really starts to crystallize.
Absolutely. The shop shifted its focus to what McLaren and Westwood termed anti-fashion. The clothing was inspired by S&M imagery, fetish wear. It was designed specifically to be confrontational, not aesthetically pleasing in any traditional sense.
In this place, it became a magnet.
It did. It attracted individuals who would become central figures in the scene. People like a young Sid Vicious, Marco Peroni, who'd later be in Adam and the Ants. They all gravitated there.
We should also acknowledge a key figure who worked there, Jordan.
Yes, Jordan, the shop assistant. Her personal style was arguably as instrumental as anyone's in establishing what we now think of as the punk look.
Her look was that radical.
For the time, it was utterly radical. Her presence in the shop, day in and day out, established a standard for visual nonconformity that the band would later adopt and amplify. She paved the way.
So we're in late 1974. Steve Jones sees an opportunity. He approaches Malcolm McLaren to manage this fledgling group.
And McLaren had just returned from New York. This is a key detail. He'd been managing the New York Dolls in their final stages.
And he came back with ideas.
He came back with a vision. He immediately implemented a significant restructuring of the band.
What did that look like?
First, the dismissal of Wally Nightingale, the original guitarist. McLaren also brought in Glenn Matlock, who was an art student working part-time at the shop, to play bass.
Which created a new problem.
It did. This shift forced Steve Jones to move from vocals, where he was the front man, over to guitar. It was a position he was initially very reluctant to take.
Why?
He wasn't comfortable there. But McLaren had decided that Jones didn't possess the specific qualities, the specific kind of frontman charisma that he was looking for.
Consequently, the search for a lead singer began. And this process was, well, it was somewhat disorganized.
That's putting it mildly. McLaren did approach some established figures. He asked Sylvain from the Dolls, Richard Hell from television. Both declined.
They also approached a then unknown major,
who also refused. So the recruitment strategy became much more desperate. It eventually involved McLaren and his associates literally stopping individuals on the street who had short hair, which was very uncommon at the time, and just asking them if they could sing.
They were recruiting based purely on image.
On image and attitude. That was all that mattered.
And this brings us to August 1975. Bernard Rhodes, who was an associate of McLaren, is walking down the street and observes a 19-year-old John Lydon.
And it was Lydon's appearance that was the primary, in fact, the only factor in his selection.
Describe the look. What did Rhodes see?
Lydon was wearing a Pink Floyd t-shirt that he had personally modified. He had taken a marker, scratched out the eyes of the band members on the shirt, and then handwritten the words, "I hate," right above the band's logo.
That's a powerful statement.
It's a clear, visceral rejection of the established progressive rock groups of the era. He also had green hair and a generally ragged look, with clothes held together by safety pins.
So he's invited back to the shop to Sex for an audition.
Yes, and the audition was unconventional. He was simply asked to mime along to Alice Cooper's song, "I'm 18, next to the shop's jukebox.
No band, no instruments, just miming to a record.
That was it. He did it with a sneer, a sense of contempt. The reaction from the band was mixed.
What did Steve Jones think?
Jones later said that he thought Lydon had an interesting face, but also that he was a real arsehole, but smart. He saw the intelligence behind the attitude.
And Jones was the one who gave him his famous moniker.
He did. He dubbed him Johnny Rotten purely because of the poor state of his teeth.
So the lineup is now essentially established. Jones on guitar, Cook on drums, Matlock on bass, and Johnny Rotten on vocals. And they needed a name.
A lot of options were considered and then rejected. Some of them are quite interesting to look back on.
What were some of them?
La Bombe, Subterraneans, The Damned, which of course another band would quickly take beyond, Teenage Novel, Kid Gladlove, and even Creme de la Creme.
Creme de la Creme. That doesn't quite fit.
Not at all. Ultimately, they selected Sex Pistols.
Which was McLaren's idea. What was his rationale?
He said the name was intended to convey the idea of a pistol, a pin-up, a young thing, a better-looking assassin. It was aggressive, it was provocative, and most importantly, it aligned perfectly with the branding of his shop.
And with Rotten in the band, the songwriting dynamic also took shape very quickly.
Yes, a very effective one initially. Rotten would provide the lyrics, these cynical, angry observations, and Glenn Matlock, who is quite a gifted musician, would compose the melodies.
And their first collaborative effort was a song that would become one of their classics.
Pretty Vacant. That was the first result of that partnership. The contrast between Matlock's quite poppy melodic contributions and Rotten's snarling lyrical content became a defining element of their early sound.
So the band is formed, they have a name, they're writing songs. The next step is a live performance.
November 1975. It happened at St. Martin's School of Art. Glenn Matlock arranged it as he was a student there.
Who were they supporting?
A band named Bazooka Joe. And the Sex Pistols set list was mostly covers at this point. They played songs by The Who, Substitute, The Small Faces, What You Gonna Do About It, and even the Monkees' I'm Not Your Steppin' Stone.
The performance itself was reportedly chaotic.
Very. They were loud, confrontational, and their set was cut short. But it started to attract a following, a very specific core group of followers.
The Bromley contingent.
Exactly. This group included individuals who would go on to become famous in their own right. Susie Sue, Steven Severin, a young Billy Idol, Sue Catwoman.
And they were called the Bromley Contingent simply because.
They hailed from the borough of Bromley. And they were instrumental in building the scene. They weren't just spectators. They were active participants in the aesthetic, in the atmosphere. They dressed the part. They lived the part.
And this is where those other influences you mentioned start to come in. The situationist ideas.
Yes, which were channeled through McLaren and a graphic designer named Jamie Reed. These were political, artistic ideas derived from the 1968 student uprisings in Paris.
How did that translate to a rock band?
McLaren and Reed saw the band as a way to inject these ideas into popular culture, to disrupt what they called the societal spectacle. Reed, in particular, was responsible for the band's entire visual identity.
He created the famous ransom note aesthetic, the cut-up lettering.
That was Reed. And that visual style was a direct translation of situationist art. It was a way of communicating these complex ideals of anarchy and disruption to a demographic, to teenagers, who were generally uninterested in left-wing political theory.
So by 1976, things are starting to accelerate. The band is reaching some critical milestones.
They are. In February, they supported a band called Eddie and the Hot Rods at the Marquee Club. That gig got them their first review in the NME, the music paper.
And that review contained a now famous quote from Steve Jones.
Yes. When asked about their music, Jones replied, "We're not into music, we're into chaos." A perfect McLaren-esque soundbite.
Then, in April 1976, an incident at the Nashville pub really cemented their public reputation for violence.
This was a key event. They were supporting the 101ers, which was Joe Strummer's band before the Clash. A physical altercation broke out, apparently started by Vivienne Westwood arguing with an audience member.
And the band got involved.
The band jumped in. This event, whether exaggerated or not, became the catalyst for their notoriety. It was the first time they were linked in the press directly with violence at their shows.
Let's talk about musical influences for a moment. In that same month, April 1976, the Ramones released their debut album in America. There's always been a debate about their impact on the Sex Pistols and the UK scene.
It's a contentious point. Paul Cook and Steve Jones have both acknowledged that the Ramones' tempo, that relentless speed, influenced them to play faster.
But Lydon disagrees.
John Lydon has consistently and forcefully denied any influence whatsoever. He states he rejected the Ramones' bubblegum, leather jacket image and viewed the British movement as something entirely distinct and more politically charged.
A few months later, on June 4th, 1976, the band plays what many consider to be one of the most important concerts in music history, the Lesser Free Trade Hall in Manchester.
Yes, organized by Howard Devoto and Pete Shelley, who would go on to form Buzzcocks.
The audience was tiny.
Incredibly small. By most accounts, there were only about 40 people there. But the cultural significance of who was in that audience is immense.
Right.
The attendance included the future members of Joy Division and New Order, Morrissey of the Smiths, Marky Smith of the Fall, Mick Hucknall of Simply Red, and of course the Buzzcocks themselves.
So that one gig.
That single event effectively triggered the entire punk movement in Manchester. It showed them it was possible.
The summer of 76 is when it all seems to explode.
It does. You see the debuts of The Clash and The Damned, both opening for the Sex Pistols. The scene is coalescing around them, and the band themselves are writing their definitive anthem during this period.
Anarchy in the UK.
Which they premiered in Manchester on July 20th. Lydon's lyrics may have been informed by some of the political material Westwood and Reed were feeding him, but he absolutely adapted them, converted them into his own unique, snarling style.
And they're getting on television now.
Their first TV appearance was on a Manchester show called So It Goes. They played their first international show in Paris, where Susie Sue was apparently harassed for her revealing outfit.
Then in September 1976, the 100 Club Punk special takes place in London.
That event is often cited as the moment the movement truly solidified. And it's worth noting, by this point, the band had become musically very proficient.
That's contrary to the myth.
The myth is that they couldn't play. The evidence from bootlegs and reviews of the time suggests they were an incredibly tight, ferocious, and powerful musical unit.
And the music industry starts to take notice. On October 8th, 1976, they sign a 2-year contract with a major label, EMI.
A huge step. They released their first single, Anarchy, in the UK on November 26th.
And it was produced by a very established figure.
Chris Thomas, who had previously worked with Roxy Music and even Pink Floyd, the very band Lydon had decried on his t-shirt.
And the visual marketing was just as important as the music.
Absolutely. The single was promoted with the iconic Anarchy flag poster by Jamie Reed, which depicted a ripped, defaced Union flag held together with safety pins, a perfect visual summary of their message.
The single is out. And then, less than a week later, on December 1st, 1976, the band achieves genuine mainstream infamy, the Bill Grundy incident.
Yes. They were booked as last-minute replacements for the band Queen on a live early evening television program on Thames Television called Today.
And the host, Bill Grundy.
During the live broadcast, Grundy, who later admitted to being intoxicated, began to flirt with Susie Sue, who was there with the band's entourage. He made some suggestive comments.
And Steve Jones responded.
Steve Jones responded with a barrage of profanity live on television at a time when that simply did not happen. Rotten also used the word shit earlier in the interview, but it was Jones's tirade that caused the explosion.
The press reaction was immediate.
It was a firestorm. The headlines the next day were things like "The Filth and the Fury" and "Who are these punks?" Grundy was suspended 2 weeks later, and his career effectively ended that night.
What did Jones himself say about it later?
He reflected that this was the precise moment they shifted from being a musical act to being a media phenomenon. The music suddenly became secondary. The consequences were severe and immediate. Their planned Anarchy tour was almost entirely canceled as local authorities banned them from playing.
The backlash was widespread.
Workers at the EMI factory itself refused to handle the record. Conservative counselors were going on record describing the band as the antithesis of humankind.
And then came the airport incident.
January 1977. While boarding a plane to the Netherlands for a gig, the band was alleged to have behaved aggressively towards airport staff, with reports of vomiting and spitting.
Which was the final straw for their record label.
Yes. Following that, and under immense political and media pressure, EMI released the Sex Pistols from their contract. They dropped them.
So they're suddenly without a label, just a couple of months after their first release, a very precarious position.
And the band's internal dynamic was about to change dramatically as well.
Because in February 1977, Glenn Matlock departed the band.
He did. The official reason given by McLaren was comical. He claimed it was because Matlock went on too long about Paul McCartney.
But the reality was more complex.
The reality was a deep and growing personal tension between Matlock and Rotten. Steve Jones also admitted later that while Matlock was a good songwriter, he just didn't look like a Sex Pistol. He didn't fit the increasingly chaotic image.
Matlock was then replaced by Sid Vicious.
Sid Vicious, born John Simon Ritchie, he had been a prominent fan and was at the time the drummer for Susie and the Banshees. He was recruited almost purely for his image.
Not for his musical ability.
He had no musical ability on the bass guitar. Reports suggest Lemmy from Motorhead attempted to teach him the basics but was unsuccessful. It was a source of immense frustration for Jones and Cook, who saw the musical competence of the band instantly diminish.
And Vicious brought other problems.
He did. His intense relationship with his American girlfriend, Nancy Spungen, and their shared heroin use introduced a deeply destructive and chaotic element into the group's dynamic.
So now with Vicious on board, they need a new record deal. In March 1977, they sign with A&M Records.
In a very public ceremony staged right outside Buckingham Palace. It was pure political theater.
And that contract lasted.
Less than a week, it was terminated on March 16th.
Why so quickly?
There is an incident of physical altercation at the A&M offices involving the band and their friends. Threats were made. The label got cold feet immediately, and as a result, 25,000 pressed copies of their next single, God Save the Queen, were ordered to be destroyed. Most were, though a few are now among the rarest records in the world.
So they're dropped again.
Right.
But Richard Branson's label, Virgin Records, sees an opportunity.
Virgin signs them in May 1977 and immediately releases God Save the Queen. And the lyrics of this song were, they were direct, political, incendiary.
Equating the monarchy with a fascist regime.
And releasing it to coincide with the Queen's Silver Jubilee celebrations, it was a calculated act of provocation.
The establishment reacted predictably.
The song was banned by the BBC and all independent radio stations. It was blacklisted. Despite this, it officially reached number 2 on the UK singles chart.
But there's always been a controversy around that chart position.
Yes, persistent rumors and some evidence suggest that it actually outsold the number 1 track that week, which was a Rod Stewart song. The theory is that the charts were deliberately manipulated to keep the Sex Pistols from the top spot during the Jubilee week.
To escalate things further, on June 7th, 1977, McLaren organized a boat party on the River Thames.
Time to mock the Queen's own official river procession. The band played a loud, aggressive set from the boat as it sailed past the Houses of Parliament.
And this ended.
In chaos. Police boats intercepted them and forced their boat to dock, where McLaren, Westwood, and several others in the entourage were arrested.
And during this period, the danger for the band members became very real.
Yes. They were no longer just controversial figures. They were public enemies. Band members were frequently physically assaulted in the streets of London by royalists or street gangs. Rotten himself suffered a severe injury, tendon damage in his hand, from a knife attack.
It got so bad they had to tour in secret.
They did. For a series of UK dates, they toured under the pseudonym The Spots Artistes, which stood for Sex Pistols on tour secretly.
Finally, in October 1977, their one and only studio album is released. Never mind the Bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols.
A landmark album. But the recording sessions were troubled. Sid Vicious was largely kept away from the studio due to his complete lack of skill.
So who played the bass parts?
Steve Jones played the majority of the bass parts on the recording, in addition to all the guitars. Glenn Matlock may have also played on some early tracks before he left. Vicious's contribution is minimal, if present at all.
The album contained their 4 big singles: Anarchy, God Save the Queen, Pretty Vacant, and Holidays in the Sun. But it immediately faced legal challenges.
Not because of the music, but because of the title. The inclusion of the word bollocks in the album title caused an uproar. Major retailers like Boots and Woolworths refused to stock it.
And it led to an actual court case.
It did. A Virgin Records store manager in Nottingham was charged under an old law with displaying indecent printed matter.
And the defense was quite brilliant.
The defense counsel, a famous barrister named John Mortimer, turned it into a linguistic debate. He produced an expert witness, a professor of English, who demonstrated that the word bollocks was not legally obscene.
What was his argument?
He showed it was an Old English term that originally referred to a small ball and was also used historically as a nickname for clergymen because they were known to talk rubbish.
So the court ruled?
The court ruled that in this context, the word simply meant nonsense and was not obscene. The case was thrown out. A major victory for free speech.
The album is a success, but the band is falling apart. In January 1978, they embark on a tour of the United States.
And it was a disaster waiting to happen. McLaren's strategy was deeply flawed. Rather than playing in punk strongholds like New York City, the tour was routed through the Deep South.
Places like Memphis, San Antonio, Dallas.
Exactly. They were deliberately putting the band in hostile environments. And the tour was plagued by issues. Vicious's heroin addiction was out of control, the infighting was constant, and McLaren was reportedly not even speaking to Rotten.
There were several ugly incidents involving Vicious.
Many. In Memphis, he went looking for drugs and got badly beaten up. On stage at one show, he appeared with the words, "Gimme a fix," carved into his chest with a razor.
And he was violent towards the audience.
In San Antonio, after being taunted, he hit an audience member over the head with his bass guitar. In Dallas, he was punched in the face by a woman who got on stage, and he spat blood back at the crowd. It was becoming a freak show.
And the final show took place at the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco on January 14th, 1978.
By this point, Rotten was suffering from the flu and felt completely isolated from the rest of the band and management. The final encore of the show was a chaotic, shambling cover of the Stooges' song, No Fun.
And at the conclusion of that song, Rotten delivered his famous final lines from the stage.
He stopped singing, let the feedback ring out, and just stared at the audience. Then he laughed and asked them, "Aha, ever get the feeling you've been cheated? Good night."
And with that, he threw down the microphone and walked off stage.
And that was the end of the Sex Pistols. Rotten felt the band had become a farce, a joke. He left the band right there in San Francisco. He was alone and broke. He had to call Richard Branson, the head of Virgin, to pay for his flight back to London.
And Vicious.
Vicious overdosed on the flight from San Francisco to New York shortly after and had to be revived. It was the beginning of his final, tragic chapter.
So following the breakup, Vicious remained in New York and attempted a brief, chaotic solo career, with Nancy Spungen acting as his manager.
It was not successful. Then, on October 12, 1978, at the Hotel Chelsea, Nancy Spungen was found dead. She had a single stab wound to her abdomen.
And Vicious was the immediate suspect.
He was in the room, in a drugged stupor. He was arrested and charged with her murder.
He was eventually released on bail.
Yes. And on the night of his release party, on February 2nd, 1979, Sid Vicious died of a heroin overdose. He was 21 years old.
After the complete dissolution of the band, McLaren tried to have the last word. He released a film called The Great Rock and Roll Swindle.
Which was a highly fictionalized, self-aggrandizing version of events. It presented a narrative where he, McLaren, had manipulated the entire scenario from the beginning. His motto was, "Cash from chaos."
The film and soundtrack featured vocals from some unusual characters.
Yes, including the notorious train robber Ronnie Biggs, whom the band visited in Brazil. It was McLaren's final attempt to control the legend.
But John Lydon fought back.
He did. He sued McLaren for unpaid royalties, for the usage of the Johnny Rotten name, and for what he claimed was unfair and manipulative management.
And he won.
In 1986, a court ruling came down in favor of Lydon, Jones, Cook, and the estate of Sid Vicious. They won control of the band's heritage, the master tapes, and the rights to the great rock and roll swindle footage. McLaren lost control.
Musically, the members all moved on to other, often very successful projects.
Lydon, reverting to his birth name, formed Public Image Ltd, or PL, which became a hugely influential post-punk band. Jones and Cook formed a more straightforward rock band called The Professionals.
And over the years, the legacy of the Sex Pistols only continued to grow.
It did. They were a band that was musically quite simple, but culturally massive. They inspired countless bands, from The Clash and Susie and the Banshees right through to Nirvana, Green Day, and even Oasis. Never Mind the Bollocks is consistently ranked as one of the greatest albums of all time.
And they were eventually recognized by the rock establishment, though they didn't exactly welcome it.
In 2006, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They refused to attend the ceremony. Instead, Rotten sent a handwritten letter full of grammatical errors calling the museum a piss stain.
Despite the acrimonious split, there were reunions.
Several. The first was in 1996 for the Filthy Lucre Tour.
A very self-aware tour name.
Yes, they were openly admitting it was for the money. There were further one-off shows and festival appearances in 2002, 2003, and again in 2007 and 2008.
Which brings us to the current era, to 2024, and looking ahead to 2025. In a development that I think surprised many people, the band has become active again.
Yes. In 2024, Steve Jones, Paul Cook, and the original bassist Glenn Matlock reunited to play live shows.
But without John Lydon.
John Lydon did not participate. Instead, they recruited a different vocalist. Frank Carter, who is well known for his work with the hardcore band Gallows, and more recently Frank Carter and the Rattlesnakes.
And what material did this new lineup perform?
They performed the album Never Mind the Bollocks in its entirety. They played a couple of initial shows at Bush Hall in Shepherd's Bush in June of 2024, and the reception was very strong.
So it expanded from there.
It did. They went on to headline the AMA Music Festival in August, and then embarked on a proper UK tour in September 2024, playing in Nottingham, Birmingham, and London.
And there are future plans booked.
Yes. Looking ahead, they have been announced to play the major UK rock festival, Download, in 2025, and also an Australian tour scheduled for April of 2025.
And perhaps most surprisingly, there's been talk of new music.
In an interview from late 2024, Glenn Matlock revealed that they did have ideas for new music, but he also said the band remains apprehensive about the potential reception that such material might receive.
It's a difficult legacy to live up to.
It reflects their awareness of the massive historical weight and expectation that comes with the name Sex Pistols.
When you look back at the whole story, the Sex Pistols remain a complete paradox. They were a band designed to be bad, to be chaotic, to cause disruption.
And yet they somehow produced a perfect, definitive rock and roll album.
They transitioned from being social outcasts, the ultimate public enemies, to becoming cultural icons, almost national treasures in a strange way.
And their story, even with this new chapter, really illustrates how cultural progression so often requires that initial moment of profound disruption.
It leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? After all the chaos, the legal battles, and the reunions, you have to wonder if their story proves that for true cultural change to happen, you first need someone willing to stand on a stage and ask if you've been cheated.
And to be willing to be the ones doing the cheating.
Thanks for listening.